I had a really tough time getting through Alan Wake 2, and not for any reason that you may think, oh, the game isn't bad. In fact, it's actually good. I mean, it's really good. But I have a small confession to make. I'm terrified when it comes to horror games. It's funny because I can sit there and watch all sorts of horror movies and have little to no reaction, but gaming is a whole different story for me. When you're watching a horror movie, you're just a passive observer, but in a game like Alan Wake 2, you're the one who has to walk down the dark corridor or turn that corner. Either way, though, I persevered and walked away with one of the most memorable and unique gaming experiences that I can remember from the last 5 years or so. At this point, we all know the struggles that this game has went through, whether it be through funding or its development cycle. Alan Wake 2's journey was not a happy path to say the least. But this particular video isn't about any of those things. This video is just gonna be about the game itself. I'll mention all the things that I liked, some things that they probably could have done better, but by the end of this, I'll also speak about where it stands years later after its initial release, whether or not it still holds up, and if it's even still worth it or not. For context, I had skipped the game on release, but most recently picked it up on a pretty big sale and thought it would be a perfect time to make this video. So with that out of the way, this video is going to be everything I have to say about Alan Wake 2. Okay, I'll start out with the story, and I'm going to keep this section as spoiler free as possible, as I will talk about the story mostly in terms of quality rather than revealing any big plot points in case you're interested in playing the game yourself. Now, the central plot follows two protagonists, Saga Anderson and Alan Wake, both of which you'll be controlling for large portions of the game. Saga is an agent for the FBI who's been assigned on a case in a small town named Bright Falls with her partner Casey. Bright Falls, of course, being the same town that Alan Wake went missing in many years ago. The game starts out with Saga and Casey investigating what appears to be a murder. Though, very quickly, you come to learn that the story that's playing out is not grounded in reality at all, with all sorts of supernatural elements and events taking place one after another. What's particularly impressive is how the game ends up weaving together the narratives of both protagonists. While they exist in what seems to be different realities, there's always a thread connecting their experiences that slowly reveals itself as you progress. This dual narrative approach could have easily become convoluted or disjointed, but thankfully that's not the case here at all. I think there isn't much I can say or add to the existing positive criticism for the game's narrative. The dark and twisted story that plays out in front of you keeps you engaged from start to finish, as new secrets unravel, new plot details unfold, and whatever avenue you thought the story was going down is pushed so far off course with a sharp left turn. The voice acting, the music, the writing, and the overall production is top tier. One thing that stood out to me in particular was the quality of the various characters' facial expressions when in dialogue. The emotions clearly play out and adds a layer of believability to the whole thing. The pacing is also a strong point. Not one chapter drags on too long. Each chapter introduces a new area, new characters, or some unforeseen plot point that throws everything into disarray. As far as the story length goes, it runs about 18 hours if you take your time, and probably closer to 15 if you don't take too long exploring the different side areas. Saga and Alan each get 9 chapters, totaling in 18 chapters. Personally, an 18-hour linear story is completely okay with me, especially when the quality is as high as it is in Alan Wake 2. I normally end these sections by either recommending or not recommending a game just based on the story alone, and this is one of the few games that I've reviewed and revisited on this channel that honestly I can fully recommend playing through just for the story alone. Okay, let's move on to gameplay. So, the gameplay of Alan Wake 2 is relatively simple, I'd say. Combat encounters are not part of your moment-to-moment gameplay. In fact, they're fairly scattered around, but when those encounters do come up, the loop is going to be pretty much the same, as it only ever evolves with the addition of new items and guns to use, but the very basics of it include you shining your flashlight on a taken enemy, which may reveal a weak point for you to strike for big damage. Your arsenal or weaponry is what keeps the gameplay relatively fresh as you make your way through the game's 18 chapters. Both Saga and Alan have their own loadouts, and these weapons can range from simple 9mm pistols or revolvers to pump-action shotguns, rifles, a crossbow, which to be honest had me laughing with how long the reload time took the first time I let off a bolt. and a flare gun, which more or less is a grenade launcher in Alan Wake's hands. The weapon variety is not very extensive, but each one does feel distinct enough to warrant some strategic consideration during some encounters. For example, I found myself constantly switching between weapons based on whatever situation I'm in. I would use the rifle when trying to pick off an enemy from long distance, and the flare gun for those moments where I was completely swarmed by enemies and needed to break through. What's interesting is that the limited arsenal actually ends up working in the game's favor, forcing you to make the most of what you have rather than giving you an excessive number of options that would otherwise undermine the survival horror aspect. While the gameplay is simple in essence, it does feel pretty satisfying to use these different weapons. Shotguns feel strong and chunky on impact as enemies react violently, and the overall gunplay in general I'd say is pretty responsive and tight. Interestingly, there isn't any melee options. Yes, you can swing your gun at an enemy if you do run out of ammo, but I would have figured that there would be some additional options outside of range play, but there really aren't any. That being said, the actual combat is fine. There are some different enemy types and variations of attack patterns, which I'll get into later to help spice things up. Defensively, you do have a dodge mechanic, which is obviously going to be quite useful when having hand axes launched at you from across the map or large blunt weapons being swung at. Your flashlight, unsurprisingly, is a core part of your loadout, as certain enemy types simply can't be damaged if you do not shine your flashlight at them, which essentially reveals a weak spot. Each time you do shine your flashlight at an enemy, this costs you a charge. Both Saga and Alan utilize this mechanic quite a bit during combat to open up enemies for damage. Overall, I liked this mechanic because it does add an extra layer of depth to what would otherwise just be a point and click combat. I also liked having to manage all the various resources at any given time, from ammo to batteries for my flashlight, as well as healing items. Being on top of all this was half the battle, and finding these resources out in the wild, whether through stashes or cabinets and boxes, always felt amazing knowing that I'd be ready for whatever comes my way next. Speaking of resources, the game has an inventory system that's something you've seen in many other survival horror games. Basically, anything you pick up takes a spot in your inventory, and based on the size of that item, it can take upwards of 4 slots. The inventory management is a little mini game of its own, and being the loot goblin that I am, I had a habit of picking up anything and everything in sight, causing me to have more than a few moments where I would run out of space. Thankfully, that's where the shoebox comes in. This essentially behaves like a stash for you, where you can store your extra items that you aren't using at the moment. Now, the game does have more or less of a stealth mechanic, but it's not super obvious, and it seems to only be applicable when you're playing as Alan Wake. See, Alan is essentially stuck in what is called the Dark Place. This is an area that has a ton of these shadow figures that sort of stalk Wake from a distance, constantly calling out his name from every direction. There is a mechanic at play here that attracts these shadow figures towards you if you do have your flashlight pointed at them, or if your flashlight is on in general. If they do end up reaching you, they'll chip for a bit of your health and sort of push you back. So playing as Wake asks that you are more aware of which scenarios you should have your flashlight on or off with. But playing on normal made it so those shadow figures weren't hyper aggressive, even if I did forget to turn my flashlight off. That being said, the whole game is likely a completely different experience when you're playing on one of the harder difficulties, though I did not experience anything other than normal. I think the whole stealth mechanic when playing as Wake does add a nice variety to the overall experience. So let me take a bit of a detour here and talk about both enemy design and variety. Enemies in Alan Wake 2 come in a few different shapes and sizes. You'll often come across taken enemies, which require their own set of strategies to take down, namely pointing your flashlight at them. These enemies do have a few different archetypes, and from what I can tell, they range from a normal melee enemy type to one that can be at range flinging axes at you, and another that can quickly teleport from area to area around you and attack faster than the other enemy types. And of course, there are also these brute types which require a lot of ammo and resources to take down, but you'll generally face only one of these at a time. You'll also come across cultists who aren't taken, therefore don't require the whole flashlight mechanic to be used in order to deal damage. To add to that, there are also some boss fights, but these fights generally apply the same exact strategies of shining your light and then applying damage. Some boss fights do have different mechanics like removing dark spots from a certain area or running around to turn on generators and so on. This is all to say that I think the combat in Alan Wake 2 is serviceable. I wouldn't say it's great. I will say the main reason you'll come to play this game is definitely not because of the combat at all. When it comes to the overall package in terms of story, level design, writing, and so on, I think combat is actually towards the very bottom of that totem pole. But the top part of that totem pole is so damn good. Somewhat repetitive combat doesn't weigh the game's quality down at all, in my opinion. Now, progression in Alan Wake 2 is also fairly straightforward. Both Saga and Alan have their own progression systems that separate them from one another. I'll first start with Saga. As Saga, you'll be able to upgrade your existing loadout by finding these pages out in the wild. These pages essentially allow you to pick any of your existing weapons from your arsenal and apply one of the upgrades to them. Each weapon does have 3 upgrades possible, and each time you do upgrade one of those 3 options, the next upgrade will be more powerful. Honestly, this system is fine. I came into this game not even expecting it to have a system like this, but some of these upgrades actually proved to be useful, and pursuing them had me combing through the maps in order to get enough of that upgrade currency. As Saga, you also have these charms, and these don't exactly fit into the progression meta topic, but I decided to include these here anyway. Like finding the manuscript pages in the various areas, you can also find these nursery rhymes that lead to charms. Charms are essentially equipable pieces of loot that give some sort of buff, and these tend to be pretty damn useful in combat, especially when you get overwhelmed. Some of these help with staggering enemies more often or having your healing items become more effective. One aspect of the progression system that I particularly appreciated was how it organically tied it into exploration. Rather than feeling like a forced collectible hunt, searching for manuscript pages and completing these nursery rhymes felt like a natural extension of being an investigator. These activities reward your curiosity and thoroughness, traits that align perfectly with playing as an FBI agent, of course. The way the progression systems are integrated into the world building is also really nice. Finding a page isn't just about getting an upgrade, it's about actually uncovering other pieces of the narrative puzzle. This overall approach to progression creates a nice and satisfying loop where exploration yields both gameplay benefits and story insights. Wake is a little bit different, but the same sort of system applies as Saga's gun upgrade progression style. As Wake, you acquire words of power. These words can be centered around different aspects of Wake's overall loadout. For instance, there are words of gun and war, which will be centered around gun upgrades. There are words of fix, which are essential for health upgrades, and words of lamp, which will be your flashlight upgrades. That's not all of them, but I don't want to go through an exhaustive list here. Like Saga, Wake attains these perk points by being aware of your surroundings and checking every nook and cranny of each area. In general, as far as progression goes in Alan Wake 2, I found the systems both for Saga and Wake to be largely similar, but the upgrades that can be attained are impactful and worth pursuing. The way it all works encourages the player not just to make a beeline for the main story progress, but asks that you take your time and comb through all the different points of interest that are available, as that's where most, if not all, the upgrades can be found. Alright, I first want to talk about the level design, and then I'll move on to the mission design. Level design in this game is some of the best I've seen really in any game that's come out in the last few years. This is an area where the game just really excels in a number of ways. You can tell there is special care and attention put into each of these different map areas that you visit both as Saga and Wake. As Saga, you'll spend the majority of your time in forests or small towns, with detours in areas such as a nursing home. Each one of these areas has a unique vibe and atmosphere. Some are much more scarier than others. Me personally, a forest at night is not so scary, but the flooded basement of a nursing home without any power is terrifying. Playing as Wake will put you in a small block of New York City, but this block has a number of sub-areas such as the whole underground subway section and the Ocean View Hotel, to name a few. It's worth mentioning that these areas are fully explorable, and as I mentioned earlier, the game highly encourages you to look around. Even Saga will mention from time to time that maybe she should check out the once flooded area. There are many secrets and collectibles off the beaten path that you would otherwise miss if you don't take that extra time to explore. Each area has a number of manuscript pages, radio tapes, television tapes, and so on. As Saga, a lot of the upgrades you do find are not on the main mission path. Puzzles end up being a big part of Saga's gameplay. The different locations you visit can have any number of cultist stashes that can contain high value loot that will make your next couple of encounters a breeze. The puzzles in this game are well thought out, often having you reference some item in the room to get a combination for a lock, or having you scour a small location for the right order of symbols needed to unlock a cache. The puzzles themselves aren't that hard. I only mention that because I know some folks out there who despise puzzle games, but nothing in this game took me more than a few minutes to get the solution to. Plus, finding all the parts of a puzzle was always super satisfying. As Wake, you have the power to change the plot at any moment, allowing you to control what a level could look like depending on what plot point you choose. I'll get more into this later, but it's something that's really well done. What I liked most about the level design was how meticulously crafted and believable the interiors of the various locations were. From dark and flooded laundry rooms, a super creepy hospital, a subway used for cultist rituals, and so on. I can sing the game praise and point out all the details of each area I liked, but this video would go on for too long. Let's get into mission design, or I guess what is it that you do exactly in this game. Saga is a detective working for the FBI. What starts out as a story that's very grounded in reality quickly takes a turn for the supernatural as a man with no heart comes back to life and causes all sorts of chaos in the morgue. This kicks off a string of investigations and cases that span the whole game. As Saga, you have an area called the Mind Place. This area is quite literally in Saga's mind, but allows you to lay out all the different details necessary to close a case. Each case can have numerous clues involving people, places, and objects used in a crime. This case board itself is pretty intuitive and can have you playing detective quickly. Putting a number of pieces together allows you to make a deduction, bringing you closer to solving a case. With that being said, the Mind Place is not something that's always necessary to interact with in your moment-to-moment gameplay. The way missions are set up allows you to figure things out without constantly interacting with this Mind Place, but I think avoiding it from the whole playing detective experience. There were some gameplay sessions where I forgot to check in on a case or add clues to where they need to go, and those moments made the Mind Place feel pretty unwieldy, especially when you have like 15 clues saved up and now you need to put them all in their proper place. I'm not sure if that was just something that happened to me, but anytime I would forget about the case board, things would pile up quickly, and I'd sit there for about 10 minutes getting everything sorted back out. Outside of the case board, there's also the profiling section where Saga is able to lay out specific details and behaviors of the different characters. I like this particular section quite a bit because it really helped in understanding who each character was, what their motivation is, and how they got wrapped up into this whole story. Missions often ask you to either consult the case board or the profiling section in order to progress and understand what the next steps to take are. Now, the actual mission objectives can get kind of repetitive if you don't space your time with Alan and Saga out evenly. That is to say, there were more than a few times that Saga had to find fuses to turn the lights back on. As Wake, you have what is called the Writer's Room. This is an area that is similar to Saga's mind space that allows you to gain an understanding of who is who and what is actually taking place. More importantly, as Wake, you have the power to change the plot at a moment's notice depending on what scene you're in. I touched on this briefly in an earlier section, but this was something I found to be pretty impressive, to be honest. Whenever you're in a scene, you have the option to jump into the writing room and rewrite that very scene that you're in, affecting your surroundings and revealing new things that weren't there before. Similarly, when playing as Wake, you have control over light, allowing you to gain and exhaust charges of light to reshape the area you're in, almost as if you're rewriting the plot. There are some puzzle areas to put this functionality to use, but more often than not, that light mechanic is used to open up closed spaces in order to advance the story. So I didn't know what section to put this particular part into, but I just want to answer the question of whether this game is scary or not, and honestly, for me, the answer is a yes. I've never been good with scary games. The most recent one I played was Resident Evil Village, which honestly wasn't too bad. It wasn't scary at all. But Alan Wake 2 definitely pumped the horror dial up to 11. There are times in this game where you're simply just exploring room to room, only to have a large black and white image flash on your screen, accompanied by an extra loud screech of some sort to add a bit of more fear to the moment. At this point, I'm just curious if it's just me, or do others find this game scary as well. The overall mission structure and what the game asks of you varies quite a bit depending on who you're playing as. Wake's world is far more strange and unsettling in my opinion in comparison to Saga's world. That one is more grounded in reality, even though that reality isn't all too real either. Kind of mincing my words here on purpose just to avoid spoilers. Overall, the juxtaposition between Saga and Wake's gameplay loops creates this rhythm to the overall experience. Saga's sections feel more methodical, investigative. You're basically trying to piece together clues, exploring locations with purpose, and following a somewhat conventional detective structure. Wake's sections, by contrast, feel much more surreal and psychological. The rules are constantly shifting, reality is bending, and your understanding of what's happening is frequently challenged. This back and forth between the grounded investigation and the mind-bending manipulation keeps the pacing fresh throughout the entire experience. Just when you start to get comfortable with one character's gameplay style, the game switches perspective and forces you to adapt, preventing any sense of repetition or fatigue from setting in, which honestly is crucial in a story that can take upwards of 18 hours to get through. Alright, let's move on to performance. Performance was the one part of the game that stuck out like a sore thumb. For the most part, the game technically ran fine, frame drops did happen, but nothing that took me out of my experience or caused much annoyance. For reference, I played the game on the base PS5 in performance mode, which targets 60 FPS, but there were definitely times where the game felt like it was well below that target. Namely when running around some of these small towns as Saga, and one particular encounter in the sheriff's station, which was probably the most impactful and visible of the frame drops that I experienced. Overall, I felt like the performance is fine, but I know that I was falling below 60 FPS at times, and given that the game has already gotten 2 DLCs, but the performance not quite being fixed, I think it's safe to say we won't be seeing any performance patches. Alright, so let's wrap this video up as I've gone on much longer than I intended to. Alan Wake 2 is a very unique game experience. Not so much in its gameplay, but more so in its story, its level design, and the interesting world that Remedy has built. I honestly went into the game not knowing what to expect. I've never been a survival horror fan, and honestly, this game won't really change that, but it was nice to step out of my gaming comfort zone and play a game in a genre that really doesn't resonate with me. What I came away with was a game that was very memorable. What ultimately makes Alan Wake 2 stand out in today's gaming landscape is how confidently it committed to its creative vision. We're in an era where many AAA titles played safe with familiar formulas and going for that broader appeal. Remedy created something that was genuinely distinctive. It's a game that trusts its audience to engage with its layered narrative and experimental nature, rewarding that engagement with an experience that lingers in your mind for a little bit after the credits roll. Even with its flaws in performance and some repetitive gameplay elements, Alan Wake 2 stands as a testament to what's possible when developers are willing to prioritize creative vision over conventional design. For that reason alone, it deserves to be experienced, so it's only right that I recommend the playthrough of Alan Wake 2. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to hit that like button. If you're new, subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one.